Hello, and welcome to another episode of Speak Up. I'm Ryan, and today we're diving into a topic that every English learner needs to pay attention to, the top 10 mistakes people make when learning English. Now, whether you're just starting out or have been learning for a while, we all know that mastering a new language can be challenging. But here's the thing. Avoiding common mistakes can really accelerate your progress and boost your fluency.
Absolutely, Ryan. And it's not just about knowing the language, but also avoiding some key errors that can hold you back. Many learners unknowingly make mistakes that slow them down. And today, we're here to help you identify those mistakes and, more importantly, give you practical advice on how to avoid them. By the end of this episode, you'll have the tools to make your learning journey a lot more effective and enjoyable.
That's right, Priya. We'll cover 10 common mistakes, and trust me, even if you think you're making just a few of these, they can have a big impact on how quickly you learn and how naturally you speak. So stick with us as we break them down and give you tips on how to handle each one. Let's kick things off by looking at the first mistake.
Now, before we dive in, it's important to remember that everyone makes mistakes, and that's okay. Mistakes are part of the learning process, but knowing what to avoid can make all the difference. So, are you ready? Let's get started with mistake number 1.
All right. Let's jump into mistake number 1, and it's a big one, not practicing speaking enough. Now, we all know that when it comes to language learning, speaking is one of the most important skills to develop. But let's be real, many of us avoid speaking out loud, especially when we're still building our confidence. Whether it's fear of making mistakes or simply feeling too shy, we let these doubts hold us back. But here's the truth. The more you speak, the more fluent you become. It's that simple.
I completely get that, Ryan. Many learners are terrified of speaking, especially in the beginning. It's intimidating to put yourself out there when you're not sure if you'll be understood, or worse, if you'll make mistakes. But here's the key. Mistakes are part of the learning process. If you avoid speaking, you're missing out on the fastest way to improve. The more you speak, the more confident you get. And those little mistakes, they'll help you learn faster.
Exactly, Priya. Think about it this way. Speaking is your opportunity to use everything you've learned, vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation, in real time. Without practice, all the grammar rules and vocabulary you learn will just stay in your head, and you'll never be able to use them naturally. You've got to speak to make it stick, and don't wait for perfect. Speak now and improve as you go.
So, how do you overcome that fear and actually start speaking more? The key is to make speaking a daily habit. It doesn't have to be anything huge. Start small. You can practice by speaking to yourself in the mirror or even recording your thoughts in English. Use language apps that have speaking exercises or find a language partner to practice with. Start with short sentences and build up from there.
And remember, consistency is key. Set aside time each day to speak in English, even if it's just for 10 minutes. You'll be surprised at how quickly you'll improve. It's all about making speaking a non-negotiable part of your routine. So don't let fear hold you back. Embrace the discomfort and watch your fluency grow. The more you practice, the easier it gets.
Exactly, Ryan. Your goal is to speak every day, even if it feels awkward at first. It might take some time, but with persistence, you'll become more natural and confident. So make sure you speak up, even when it feels hard. After all, practice makes progress. And that's how fluency happens.
All right, let's move on to mistake number 2, translating directly from your native language. Now, we've all been there. You learn a new word in English, and your first instinct is to translate it directly from your native language, right? But here's the thing. This doesn't work the way you think it will. Languages aren't just a set of words that can be swapped in and out. Each language has its own unique structure, idioms, and ways of thinking. So, if you translate word for word, you're often left with sentences that sound awkward, unnatural, or even confusing.
Exactly, Ryan. It's tempting to think that all we need to do is find the equivalent word in English, but it's much more than that. Languages have their own logic, and simply translating doesn't capture the nuances of meaning, tone, or context. For example, The way you might phrase something in your native language could sound completely strange in English. And that's where the danger lies. You're not just learning words, you're learning how to think in English.
Right, Priya. And that's where thinking in English comes in. It's one of the best ways to improve your fluency. If you try to translate every word in your head, your brain will get stuck, and it'll be harder to form sentences smoothly. Instead, try to start thinking in English as much as possible. When you do that, you stop translating and start internalizing the language. It helps you think like a native speaker and react more quickly in conversations.
Absolutely, Ryan. And let me tell you, thinking in English isn't something that happens overnight, but with practice, it becomes easier. Start by surrounding yourself with English. Listen to English podcasts, watch movies, and read books in English. The more you immerse yourself, the more natural it will feel to think in English. Over time, your brain will start to form sentences in English without you needing to translate them.
Exactly. And you don't have to dive into complex conversations right away. Start small. Think about simple things in English, like describing what you're doing or talking about your day. The goal is to train your mind to operate in English rather than relying on translation. And before you know it, you'll find that you're thinking in English more naturally, and your speaking will flow much smoother.
Exactly, Ryan. So, to avoid the trap of translating, focus on creating an English environment around you. Challenge yourself to think in English, not just translate from your native language. The more you practice, the easier it will become. And soon you'll realize that English is no longer a foreign language. It'll feel like second nature.
Now let's talk about mistake number 3, and this one's a biggie: ignoring grammar rules. We've all heard people say things like, grammar doesn't matter as long as you can communicate. But here's the truth. Grammar is essential. It's the foundation of any language, and without a solid understanding of grammar, your communication can easily become unclear or confusing. Imagine trying to give directions, but your sentence doesn't follow the right order or tense. It would be difficult for someone to understand what you mean, right?
Exactly, Ryan. Grammar may seem intimidating at first, but it's crucial for clear communication. It helps you organize your thoughts and convey your message in a way that's easily understood. For instance, small grammar mistakes, like confusing verb tenses or subject-verb agreement errors, can completely change the meaning of a sentence. For example, saying, "I have gone to the store yesterday" instead of "I went to the store yesterday" might confuse someone about when the action actually took place.
That's a great example, Priya. And the thing is, you don't have to become a grammar expert to speak correctly. The key is understanding the basics: tenses, word order, and subject-verb agreement, because these are the building blocks of clear communication. Once you grasp these key areas, you'll notice how much smoother your conversations become.
Exactly, Ryan. And let's talk about some of the common grammar mistakes that many learners make. One mistake is misusing articles like a and the. For example, saying "I went to a school" when you're referring to a specific school is incorrect. You should say, "I went to the school." Another common mistake is not using the right prepositions, like saying, "I'm good in English," instead of "I'm good at English." These small mistakes can really affect your fluency, but they're easy to fix once you know the rules.
Exactly, Priya. So, how do you avoid these mistakes and improve your grammar? Focus on the fundamentals. Don't try to learn everything at once. Start with the basics, like sentence structure, common tenses, and word order. Once you've mastered these, you'll be able to build on them and gradually refine your grammar. And don't forget, practice makes perfect. Use grammar exercises, apps, or language exchange platforms to reinforce what you've learned.
And remember, it's okay to make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them. Focus on the areas where you struggle most and practice those until they become second nature. Over time, grammar will feel less like a challenge and more like a tool that helps you express yourself clearly and confidently in English.
All right, moving on to mistake number 4, focusing only on vocabulary. Now, don't get me wrong. Vocabulary is super important. The more words you know, the better you can express yourself. But here's the problem. Just learning vocabulary alone won't make you fluent. You can memorize hundreds or even thousands of words, but if you don't know how to use them in real conversations, it won't get you very far.
Exactly, Ryan. Vocabulary is like the building blocks of language, but it's not the whole structure. You need to know how to use those words properly, in sentences, in the right context, with the right grammar and pronunciation. Without that, all the vocabulary you've learned won't help you communicate effectively. Fluency isn't just about knowing words, it's about knowing how to put them together.
Right. And it's not just about vocabulary either. Listening, speaking, and grammar all play a role in fluency too. Let's say you learn a new word, but when you hear it in a conversation, you don't recognize it because you haven't practiced listening. Or maybe you can understand the word, but you struggle to use it correctly because you're not confident in your grammar. All skills need to work together.
Exactly. To become fluent, you need a balance. Vocabulary learning should go hand in hand with improving other skills. So, for example, when you learn a new word, practice using it in sentences. Focus on listening to conversations, watching shows, or listening to podcasts in English to get used to how native speakers use that vocabulary. And of course, practice speaking. Don't just memorize words. Put them into practice.
Right, Priya? And let's not forget that context is key. The way you use a word can change depending on the situation. This is why you need to expose yourself to real-world English as much as possible, through movies, conversations, and reading. You'll start seeing how words are used in different contexts, and that's when your vocabulary truly becomes useful.
Exactly. So, to avoid the mistake of focusing solely on vocabulary, make sure you're integrating listening, speaking, and grammar practice into your learning routine. Balance is everything. The more you practice all of these skills together, the faster you'll become fluent. And remember, don't rush it. Focus on quality over quantity. It's not about learning more words, it's about using the words you know effectively.
Now let's dive into mistake number 5. Not listening to native speakers enough. Listening is one of the most crucial skills in language learning. If you don't listen to native speakers, it's hard to understand how English is actually used in real life. It's not just about memorizing vocabulary or grammar rules, it's about hearing how everything comes together naturally in conversations.
Exactly, Ryan. When we're learning a language, we can often get stuck in textbooks or classroom settings. But the real magic happens when we listen to how native speakers use the language in everyday situations. It's in their tone, the rhythm of their speech, and even their body language. Listening is key to improving both understanding and pronunciation. The more you listen, the more you start to internalize the way English flows naturally.
That's a great point, Priya. And here's something else. When you listen to native speakers, you pick up on things you might miss in textbooks, like slang, idioms, and informal expressions that are commonly used in conversation. These things don't always appear in formal lessons, but they're crucial if you want to sound natural when speaking English. So, without listening to native speakers, you're missing out on this real-world language.
Exactly. Now, how can we improve our listening skills? Well, it's all about active listening. Don't just play a podcast or watch a movie in the background. Focus on the sounds, the words, and the way native speakers form their sentences. Try to imitate their pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. For example, when you're listening to a podcast, pause and repeat sentences aloud. This will help you get used to the sounds and improve your own speaking.
That's a great tip, Priya. Another way to improve your listening is by exposing yourself to different types of content. Watch movies, listen to podcasts, and engage in conversations with native speakers if possible. The more diverse the content, the more you'll understand different accents, dialects, and speaking styles. It's all about exposure. And the best part? You can do this anytime and anywhere, whether you're on your commute, exercising, or just relaxing at home.
Absolutely, Ryan. The goal is to listen as much as possible. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself by listening to content that's a little difficult at first. Over time, your ear will become sharper, and you'll start understanding more and more. Remember, language learning is a journey, and every bit of listening practice helps you get closer to fluency.
All right, now let's talk about mistake number 6, relying too much on language apps. I think we've all been there, downloading that shiny new language app and thinking it's going to magically make us fluent. Don't get me wrong, language apps can be really useful, especially when you're starting out. They're great for building vocabulary, practicing grammar, and even improving pronunciation. But here's the thing, they're not enough.
Exactly, Ryan. While apps are a good starting point, they can't replicate the real-world experience of speaking with native speakers or interacting in real-life situations. Think about it. Apps can teach you words, phrases, and grammar, but they can't teach you how to have a conversation, how to think on your feet, or how to handle the natural flow of dialogue. Real-world practice is where the magic happens.
That's right, Priya. And let's not forget, language apps are often designed with specific goals, like learning vocabulary or grammar drills. But real-world language use is far more complex. Conversations are filled with slang, informal expressions, interruptions, and even misunderstandings. Apps just can't simulate that kind of dynamic interaction. To really improve your language skills, you need to step out of the app and start using the language in real situations.
Exactly, Ryan. Real-world practice is so important. So what can you do to make sure you're not relying too much on apps? First, try to engage in language exchange with a native speaker, either online or in person. There are platforms like Tandem or HelloTalk where you can connect with language partners and practice speaking in real conversations. And if you can, join local meetups or conversation groups where you can practice face-to-face with others.
Another great idea, Priya, is to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible. Watch movies, listen to podcasts, or read books in English. These activities will give you exposure to how the language is really used in context, beyond what any app can teach you. And don't forget to practice speaking regularly. Even if you don't have a conversation partner, try talking to yourself or recording yourself speaking. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
Exactly, Ryan. Apps can be part of your language learning journey, but they shouldn't be the only tool you rely on. You need to combine them with real-world practice to truly develop your fluency. Keep in mind that language learning is about engagement and interaction, not just memorization. Use a mix of resources, apps, real conversations, and immersive experiences, and you'll see much quicker progress.
Now, let's move on to mistake number 7, not being consistent. You know, a lot of people fall into the trap of studying English in short bursts. Maybe they'll cram for an hour or two on the weekend, but then they don't touch the language again for days or even weeks. It's tempting to think that these intense study sessions will get you ahead, but the truth is, consistency is the key to progress.
Exactly, Ryan. It's not about how much you study in one day. It's about how regularly you do it. The most successful learners are those who practice a little bit every single day. Even if you only have 15 or 20 minutes a day to practice, doing it consistently will yield better results in the long run than cramming for hours once a week. Language learning is a marathon, not a sprint.
Right. Consistency beats intensity. The reason for that is simple. Language learning requires repetition and gradual reinforcement. If you only study for long periods occasionally, you're not giving your brain enough time to absorb and retain the information. But when you make learning a daily habit, your brain gets to process and internalize the language more effectively. It becomes part of your routine.
So, how can you make English learning a daily habit without feeling overwhelmed? First, set realistic goals. You don't need to aim for hours of study every day. Start small. Even 10 to 20 minutes a day can make a huge difference if you're consistent. Focus on quality over quantity, whether it's practicing vocabulary, listening to a podcast, or having a short conversation.
Another tip is to make it part of your daily routine. For example, you could listen to a short English podcast during your commute or practice speaking while you're cooking or cleaning. Find ways to incorporate English into your everyday activities so it doesn't feel like extra work. The more natural it becomes, the easier it will be to stick with it.
And don't forget to track your progress. Seeing how much you've improved over time can be really motivating. You might want to keep a journal of new words you've learned, or even record yourself speaking to track your pronunciation and fluency. Celebrate the small wins, and remember, it's okay to have days where you don't feel as productive. The most important thing is to keep going, no matter what.
All right, moving on to mistake number 8, fearing mistakes. This is a big one. A lot of language learners are afraid of making mistakes, whether it's in speaking, writing, or even when they're practicing grammar. But here's the truth. Mistakes are a natural part of the learning process. No one becomes fluent without making a few errors along the way. It's how we learn and grow.
Absolutely, Ryan. The fear of making mistakes can actually hold people back from practicing in the first place. They worry they'll say something wrong or sound silly, so they avoid speaking or trying new things. But the reality is, every mistake is an opportunity to improve. When you make a mistake, you're actually getting closer to fluency, because you're learning what works and what doesn't.
Exactly, Priya. And I think it's important to remind ourselves that native speakers make mistakes too. It's part of being human. Language is a tool for communication, not perfection. So instead of avoiding mistakes, we should embrace them. The more you speak, the more mistakes you'll make, and the faster you'll learn. Think of each mistake as a stepping stone towards becoming more fluent.
That's so true, Ryan. And here's how we can overcome that fear. First, shift your mindset. Instead of seeing mistakes as failures, try to view them as learning opportunities. Every time you make a mistake, it's a chance to correct yourself and get better. Take the pressure off yourself. You don't have to be perfect right away. The goal is progress, not perfection.
Right, Priya. And you can even take it a step further. Use mistakes to build confidence. When you make a mistake, don't be afraid to laugh it off or acknowledge it. It shows that you're trying and that you're willing to improve. And when you correct yourself, you're reinforcing the right way to do things. So, it's a win-win.
Exactly, Ryan. The fear of making mistakes can be paralyzing, but once you overcome it, you'll see huge progress. So, the next time you make a mistake, don't beat yourself up. Celebrate it as part of the journey, because it means you're learning and growing. And remember, we've all been there. Every language learner has made mistakes, and that's how we get better.
Now let's dive into mistake number 9, not using English in real-life situations. Many learners focus on studying from books, apps, or even in a classroom setting, but they fail to use English in everyday life. And that's a huge missed opportunity. Real-life usage is crucial for retention. When you use English in your daily activities, the language becomes more meaningful, and your brain starts to absorb it naturally.
That's so true, Ryan. The more you use English in real-life situations, the more it becomes part of your everyday thinking. For example, if you're practicing English in isolation, like through exercises or memorization, you're not giving yourself the chance to use the language in real-time conversations. But when you actually speak or write in English regularly, you begin to see immediate improvement. Real-life practice reinforces what you learn in theory.
Exactly, Priya. And you know, it doesn't matter if you're not living in an English-speaking country. There are still countless opportunities to incorporate English into your daily routine. It's all about creating situations where you can use the language naturally. This might mean watching movies or shows in English, but also trying to speak to yourself in English when you're doing simple tasks like cooking or shopping. The more you practice using English in these settings, the more comfortable you'll become.
Right. And it doesn't have to be complex. Start small by labeling things around your home with their English names, or try narrating your actions as you do them. For example, if you're making breakfast, say aloud, "I'm frying an egg," or "I'm cutting vegetables." This practice helps reinforce vocabulary and sentence structure in a natural context. It doesn't feel like a lesson. It just becomes part of what you do every day.
Another great idea is to find conversation partners. Look for language exchange programs or apps like Tandem or Hello Talk, where you can connect with native speakers for casual conversations. Having real conversations is one of the most effective ways to improve your fluency. And it doesn't matter if you make mistakes. What matters is that you're practicing and building confidence.
Exactly. And you could even join online communities where people are learning English, or participate in discussion groups. The key is to immerse yourself in English as much as possible. The more you surround yourself with the language, the more you'll start thinking in English, and that's when fluency really begins to take off.
All right, we've reached mistake number 10, giving up too early. This is a tough one because language learning can feel overwhelming at times. There will be days when it feels like you're not making progress or that fluency is too far out of reach. But here's the thing. Persistence is key. It's easy to give up when things get difficult, but those who stick with it are the ones who succeed.
Exactly, Ryan. Learning a language is a long-term commitment, and it's normal to feel frustrated along the way. But the important thing is that you don't quit just because you hit a rough patch. Every learner goes through ups and downs. Even native speakers struggle with their own language at times. What matters is that you keep going, even when it feels hard.
Absolutely, Priya. The path to fluency isn't linear. There will be times when you feel like you're moving backwards, but that doesn't mean you're not making progress. It's like climbing a mountain. Sometimes you can't see the top, but every step you take gets you closer. Persistence will carry you through the difficult times, and eventually you'll see the results of all the hard work you've put in.
So, how do you stay motivated during those challenging moments? First, set clear, achievable goals. Don't just aim for vague ideas like, I want to be fluent. Instead, break it down into smaller goals, like learning 10 new words a week or being able to have a 5-minute conversation in English. Having clear targets makes it easier to stay focused and see your progress.
Another great way to stay motivated is to find support. Surround yourself with people who are also learning English or who can encourage you. Whether it's friends, teachers, or language exchange partners, having people to talk to and share your progress with can keep you inspired. The right support system can make a huge difference.
And finally, keep a positive mindset. Celebrate your progress, no matter how small. Every little step forward is a victory. And remember, the road to fluency isn't a race. It's a journey. Stay patient and trust the process, because the rewards will come if you stay committed. So keep going, even when it gets tough. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of our upcoming podcasts. We've got lots more great tips and discussions to help you reach your language goals. Thank you for listening, and as always, keep practicing, stay motivated, and remember, you're on the path to fluency.